Thank you everyone for staying tuned for my session. So I just said my name's Carley and I've recently joined the Client Excellence team at Sappy Store. So my session is a little bit different. I'm sharing something, I guess, a bit more general about how we can work better within this industry, regardless of whether we're a supplier or whether we're a client. I guess if I just start with a bit of background about myself. So before I joined Zappy earlier this year, I was working client side, so I was part of the Insight team. And that's actually where I first thought about this topic for today's presentation. And then just since joining Zappy, the message that I want to leave with you today has just been further emphasised. So don't be too busy to learn the wheel. This is just about how suppliers and clients can work better together so that both parties can get the outcomes that they need. But what I'm actually talking about when saying being too busy to learn the wheel, what does that mean? So I guess it can just be summarised by this image here. It's something that I really like, and I'm sure many of you have seen it before, but what we've got here is these two guys working really hard to get this heavy carton of rocks to where they need to be, but using a square wheel. So it looks like hard work, and it's taking both of their efforts, and they're clearly really busy. And then we've got this other guy, and he's got this great new invention. It's the circular wheel. And he's telling these two, if they just take 10 minutes and just hear him out and try changing that square wheel for the circular one, he can assure them that their lives will be a lot easier. But of course, they're just too busy, so they can't take those 10 minutes. They couldn't possibly. They've just got to carry on as they are, at the same pace, with the same struggle. And the reason I'm sharing this image is because I think that we can just apply this to the modern day workplace. So as a client, I was often guilty of being those guys with the heavy rocks, and now at Zappy, I'm that guy holding the circular wheels. So the message the image is just trying to put across really is, it's really simple. So take time out to learn the wheel, and ultimately it could help you in the long run. And I know that's obviously easier said than done. As I just said, before Zappy I was client side, and that was my first role being a client. Before that I'd always been supplier side, and I've noticed a real dramatic difference moving from supplier to client. All of a sudden I had these phone calls and emails and invites to different events to learn new things and hear about what they did, and obviously that's great. But what I found on the Insight team is you're spinning a lot of plates. So there's different stakeholders and projects and timelines and reports and data sets. It's pretty hectic. So taking the time to learn the wheel, so whether that's meeting with a new supplier or managing existing relationships and just staying on top of industry news, that became a bit of a challenge. So having been on both sides, it kind of got me thinking, and I could see these two points of view. So as a supplier, we want to help our clients, and then as a client, we're trying to learn so that we can ultimately deliver to our stakeholders what they need. So deliver a project that meets its objectives, whether that's timings or budgets or whatever. But it got me thinking of how we can join these two up. So how we can be better as a supplier and as a client to get both parties what they need, and ultimately just get us to where we want to be. So going back to the chaos of client side, as I said, it can be a bit of a game of spinning plates, and as I just listed, you've got stakeholders and projects and all of that, different methodologies, and of course then internal questions coming at you from all different angles. So how would you recommend we do this, or can you tell me where I can find this? And it can be bedlam at times, and there's just no headspace, and I use this word quite often in the next few minutes, but there's no headspace or room to take a moment just to think outside the box. And I can absolutely hold my hand up and say I've been guilty of that, and sticking to what I know, I guess, for the sake of ease, even though I know it's not the best option. And I think that's the important thing to focus on. It's not entirely the best option, but I don't have the time to look elsewhere or to try something new. So I was being that person with the square wheel. So how could we change things? So I put my client hat on, and this is kind of a personal overview of recommendations for how we as a supplier should perhaps approach our clients so that we can help them when they're in a square wheel situation. And as I said, this is completely personal feeling, and I'd definitely be interested to hear any of your thoughts at the end of my session today. So the first one, cut to the chase. Remember, we're busy, there's not much headspace, and the message and the point of the conversation needs to be communicated really soon, like ASAP in my opinion. Otherwise, I'm just going to start thinking, my mind's going to start wandering, and I'm probably going to start panicking about my to-do list. But if I can see the solution to the problem really quickly, it's going to calm me down, and then I'm going to want to hear more. So for me, I felt that background can come later, but let's just solve the issue in hand in the first instance. And then email first. Again, personal opinion, and also probably down to the purpose of your communication. But I think if you're trying to provide a lot of information, I think that an email works really well. So it goes back to the headspace thing. If I'm focusing on something else, say I'm running a report and my brain is completely focused on that task, and then the phone rings, I have to take myself out of that zone, move myself into a completely different space, which it breaks your flow, it can break your concentration, whereas with an email, you can just pick up what you need, when you need it, and then arrange a telephone call if you need that. And with email, it's not going anywhere either, so you can read it 100 times if you need to, and you can share it amongst the team, whereas if you take the call, you might jot down a few notes, but that's not very shareable, and it can also get lost in your notebook more often or not. And then jargon free. So this is a really big one for me. I think that our industry is made up of a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of abbreviations, and they can all mean the same thing, but they've got different wording and so forth. So ideally, I say just keep it really simple. Otherwise, you spend double the time trying to decode it. And I know that acronyms are there to kind of shorten the time that it takes to write the email, but when there's so many versions, I think a lot of things can get kind of lost in translation. So I like to just play it safe and keep jargon free. And then finally, just putting it into context. So again, going back to the headspace thing, but if someone's busy and they haven't got too much time to really, think hard at something, then putting it into context kind of cuts that journey. So if you take an example of something that's worked really well for another or a similar client, it's a lot easier to imagine how that works for you. So especially if you're needing like a sign-off or something from someone else, you can just share that case study and it just cuts straight through that process. It's just a really valuable asset to have. And yeah, definitely would like to hear kind of anyone else's thoughts. I was actually chatting to my housemate this weekend about it, and she was saying how layout of an email is really important to her. If it's a big block of information, she's not going to digest it. Okay, so if you flip back now to the supplier side, I'm taking you back to this square wheel image here. So this is Zappy holding that circular wheel. We're trying to help. We're trying to get you what you need in half the time, a fraction of the cost, and then you're not compromising on quality. And we know you're busy, but we also know that if you take 30 minutes of your time, it might save you 30 hours the following month. We know this because we've seen it work for others who've made time to learn the wheel. So how can you as a client make time to learn the wheel? So it's not rocket science, hence my creative use of imagery here, but these are a few suggestions which I tried out when I was client side. So first of all, thinking about the way you work. Again, completely talking for myself here, but I guess overall I feel like I'm quite self-motivated, but I know that I can get really easily distracted. So if there's a training session in the office where I can either listen at my desk or listen to the recording later on or go sit in the training live with the trainer, I know that I'm going to pick the last one, because if I'm sat at my desk, someone could come over or I'll start looking at emails, or if I say I'll listen to something later, you just don't know what might crop up. So that's me, and I know that if I'm taking time to learn the wheel, then I really need to plan in a way that suits me. And obviously every person is different, so it's just important to think about what works best for you. And then setting a target for the number of suppliers or agencies you'll meet in a month. So this is something myself and a colleague did. There was just two of us on an insight team, so it was really busy, and it was a recommendation from someone else on another insight team at a different company, because I was a little bit concerned that we were being very tunnel vision and weren't kind of speaking to other people. So we actually made it a metric rather than just something to do when you have the time, and that just added to its importance. So we knew it was important, but because it didn't actually have a specific deadline or a stakeholder, I guess, attached to it, it just felt less of a priority. But when we actually put it into practice, we found it was really beneficial. And then being organised, this is a really obvious one, but being able to manage your time and your workload to just allow yourself the time to learn the wheel is basic, but it is key. So just setting and scheduling a time in the diary and sticking to it was something that just forced us to really be better and to learn. And then finally, to keep a track of who you see and what you learn. So I guess not everything that you learn has its immediate benefits. So, you know, you might go to an event one day and the next day it's not going to give you all the answers, but you just don't know a few weeks or a few months down the line. So we just started to think a bit more longer term. So we put together this tracker document just for us internally, which allowed us to log who we were seeing and just make quick notes so we could refer back to it in the future. So this is kind of what the overview of the document was. So once we'd met with a supplier, we could just find out all the information about who they were. So their contact details, an overview of what they do, kind of an estimate on their pricing. And then if we actually worked with them, we could track the experience. So then we'd log how we rated it in terms of experience quality, the relationship, the value, and so forth. And that was just a really nice way of us being able to share the information amongst the team and just keep a log of everything. So just to summarise, I've quite briefly covered my point of view from a supplier and from a client, and how being aware of the other one can just help us to work together so that everyone is a winner. So if as a supplier we can be empathetic and stay relevant and be time efficient for our clients, who we know obviously are very busy, but they are still willing to learn, they want to succeed and can be organised, I really think that then we can develop a partnership so both parties are able to achieve their goals and ultimately succeed. So that's all from me. Thank you for your time, and here to take any questions.